requests to return to the Dialictus guide. We've jumped around when Joel and Jason first started with us onto those tricky groups, and then we went back and did the other subgenera. So now the plan was to go step by step, as we just did with the last key, return and kind of how did we get to those big tricky groups. So I think I sent out the kind of abbreviated version that Joel or Jason once sent me of the Canadian Dialictus key. But I thoroughly encourage you to find the full document on the internet because it's too big for me to send you, and it has a lot of helpful pictures. So with that, I think Sam's on microscope today. Joel's here to be a talky person. And do you guys have any other announcements ready to go?
I'll just mention to Joel that if you know some specimens a little bit beforehand that we're going to want to look at, let me know, because I've got them all behind me, not so much the Western ones though, and I'll pull them, and really only the females at this point.
Okay, yeah, I didn't really know what we were going to look at today aside from Claire just said that we were going to start working through the key, so.
Yeah, so depending on how you guys want to go, we can either get through those first through couplets, right, that just kind of break out normal things, and we could either go into what looks like I think one of the big jumps will take us down to Bruneri and things like that, or one of the first big jumps from the beginning of the key will take us into the things that are enlarged tegula. So choose your own adventure, whichever one is easier to grab the specimens for, Sam.
Yes. No, I've been so careful.
All right, so are we ready for Joel? You'll be in the driver's seat, and I will be your servant.
I'm happy to screen share too if you need that support.
Okay. So I guess I should just start going through couplet by couplet. Is that kind of what the plan was?
Before you get too far in, Joel, let's assume that people have a basic understanding of BTEC, morphology. So, for example, we don't need to have pictures of 10 versus 11 segments on the antennae, and or 12, I should say, and things like that. And also sometimes when you're using mesosoma and metasoma, you might also say thorax or abdomen in addition, just so that people get familiar with the lingo and aren't left completely behind. But those are my only suggestions.
Okay. So couplet 1, we're using the 2022 update to the key to Dialictus of Canada, which is in an online supplement, and it's open access. So couplet 1 splits off all of the socially parasitic species. So we did go over these in a previous class, but perhaps there are new people in the audience who did not see that. So the socially parasitic species are distinctive in several different characters. They don't have scopa, which is pretty obvious if you know what you're looking at. But if you're not familiar, if you've never seen one before, it can be a little bit hard to judge because the scopa on Lasioglossum it's not like the pollen baskets on honeybees and bumblebees. It's not super obvious. They'll have a lot of long, really plumose seedy on their hind legs, but it's kind of sparse. And if you just have a bunch of non-parasitic bees, it can be a little bit hard to judge sometimes, like, is that scopa or not? But if you see the parasitic ones and you look at the hind legs, especially the femur, it'll just be a couple of like kind of medium length straight seedy that don't have any branches on them, just some straight simple seedy.
So Sam, do you have, I think we have Rossini in there. Do you want to pull up one just to show the difference?
I do. I'm actually gonna have a simplex here, since it's the one of the more subtle species, and I'm going to show that one if that's okay. But we also have Rossini. That's a very common one, and we also have what's the super common one?
Platyparius.
Oh, yes, we have Platyparius. Was Platyparium, now Platyparius. So I'm going to share my screen and we will go to the software for the microscope. Oops. And somewhere will be a bee in the screen. There is the.
And you're going to have simplex up?
Yeah, this is simplex, and we'll take a look at the. So I think Joel mentioned this, but there's reduced hairs, scopal hairs, but there aren't like no hairs. And so simplex is a great one because it's the one, at least in the East, that I would say most people are going to skip over because it doesn't have a big cheek. It has a number of other characters that look pretty much like the other pollen carrying ones. Sorry, I'm doing two things at once. Now let's go in here to the legs. So, yeah, there is the legs on this one. Why does that look like it's a pollen carrying species? Let me just check that I have simplex under here. Yeah, no, it is. So that's the thing. It's like I was looking at what probably is dirt on the legs. I'm like, oh, there's some pollen, but it's not. And we'll take a look at the face too for some of the characters there. But the thing that I look for the most, and Joel, I don't know what you do, but is I often look on the femur because the femur usually has some really long, obvious hairs in it. And
yeah,
that's lacking here.
Definitely the femur is the place to look. The tibia on parasitic and non-parasitic species looks almost the same.
Yeah, and that threw me because you see those white things and we're like, oh my God, is that pollen? But even the femur is still has long hairs. So again, there's a little bit of subtlety here, and that's why simplex is the one that often gets overlooked. And you don't see it that often in records, but we see it commonly, and it's maybe the third most common species in parasitic land. Let's see if I can remember how do we do this? Control Shift Alt Shift F to get it. There we go. Bigger. So you can see here, so these are the reduced hairs, and the tibia hairs here, as Joel mentioned, and I was immediately confused by, I guess that's not even pollen here. It's reflections that look like pollen, but it scared me. And we won't see on most specimens that are collected and processed the usual way, we're not going to see the labral process because the mandibles cover that process. But we can see here the simplified sorry, again, I'm trying to do two things. A simplified mandibles without a tooth. But you almost never look at that, right? So it's a secondary, like, let's check out the mandibles to make sure they're simple. So they're simple blades. Many of the other groups of parasitic species have monster heads, long cheeks, and really long mandible tips, I guess, to fight or something. Simplex is very subtle, but you can see, can't really see the labrum under there, but you can see the relatively simple blade. It comes to a point. Anything else you want to say about simplex and parasitic species?
You pretty much covered a lot of it. It is a bit of an oddball because most of them are really obvious because they'll have like giant heads and giant mandibles. But yeah, simplex doesn't. But it does still have a little bit of a distinctive head. The head on simplex is very, very short, with the clypeus like not really protruding below the eyes much at all. And
it's very roundy looking.
It's like kind of it's kind of short, and it's kind of like sloped in at the bottom.
So this is upside down, but you can see the odd shape. You can see the mandible tip curving out there too. I'm trying to get a look over here at the pronotal collar. Am I to assume correctly that the pronotal collar has a strong angle to it? If we can see it, or not in simplex?
Yeah.
Yeah,
there is a parasitic species that does not have that strong carina, and I forget which one it was now, but most of them do have that.
And oh, there we can see it sort of, but a few of the non-parasitic species have it too. Thinking of Heterognathum, and there's probably others. Heterognathum looks almost. Heterognathum looks like it's almost wants to be a parasitic species, but never quite figured it out. So here is a really sharp ridge running down onto the pronotal collar. In most species, non-parasitic species, this is very rounded, horse collar-like. From above, you can see a sharp angle here. We're not quite at the projection where you can see that that's pretty much a right angle. But here you can see the ridge that's formed that would not be there in most species. Again, little things. We'll focus on the lower one now, or the closer one, and you can see more the right angle here being formed, and then there's a ridge running off from there. See if we can see that more closely. A little hard to see the ridge. This is often the case. The head's in the way, so you have to peek around the corner. All right. I'm not sure, Joel, do you think we need to look at other parasitic species at this moment, or is this good?
Probably not, unless we have audience demand for it.
Okay.
I'm just nothing in the chat yet. This is your time to speak up.
We did cover them in a previous class in a little bit more detail.
as Joel mentioned, most of these parasitic species, when you look at it, it's like, oh my God, what is that? That is so freaky looking. Simplex is in the east, one of those that doesn't. It would look like a versatum / amaranthum / trigeminum kind of thing.
Yeah, so you can't get complacent with skipping over that first couplet. Like if you have the bee with a normal looking head, that is an easy habit to get into. Like, oh, there's no giant head here. It must not be a parasite. Skip that couplet.
Yeah. I remember when I was starting out, all this was very confusing. And what I would end up doing, because of course I had slugs of Lasioglossum, is I would just go through them over and over again and separate them into groups. And I would subdivide those groups until I felt like I had no more groups to subdivide. And that was really useful in some ways, just because I was looking at lots of material rather than picking up one and trying to struggle through when I don't have a good understanding of the scope of characters and visuals on these things. So we've talked about this before, but my suggestion for people, particularly who are starting out, 5 minutes, just spend a little bit of time poking at the keys and then put them down and just do a lot of looking at specimens morphologically. And if you have a reference collection, try keying that reference collection out so that you learn the morphology and the thinking of the people who make the guides.
So I don't think we need to see any more parasites, but should we look at a non-parasitic bee and show what the
That's a good idea.
Femur look like?
Yeah, so I guess I would assume that we really don't need to, we'll do a Dialictus group thing. And so we will, I'm just looking for a good specimen here, Zephram, and doesn't matter which species per se. All right, I'm going to share.
Question in the chat about parasitic species in Oregon. There are no parasitic species recorded from Oregon.
What? That's crazy.
And there's generally none recorded from the Western U.S. in general. The parasitic species are generally east of the Rocky Mountains. Although there is one anomalous record of Platyparius that we have from Washington. And it's like the only one that I know of from west of the Rockies. So I'm not certain that it's actually permanently established here. But generally, Western U.S., you don't need to worry so much about parasitic species.
Do we think that that's just we haven't looked hard enough, or is there a biological reason that might explain that gap?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure why there aren't parasitic species in the West.
When you go down to Central America, do you get parasitic species? I seem to recall stuff from Barra, Colorado Island that indicated that they were getting parasitic species there.
There are a lot of parasitic halictids down there. But not any Dialictus that I'm aware of.
So would you say that that's some kind of indicator that Dialictus were largely an Eastern group that leaked to the West?
The parasitic lineages, for sure. Dialictus in general, less certain where their origin was.
Mm-hmm. Does the Dialictus group occur in Europe?
Yes, it does. And actually, now that you mention it, The phylogeny that I did in my PhD, all of the Palearctic species come out at the base of the tree. So all of the basal lineages in Dialictus are like all the Palearctic, all the African, Asian stuff. So they seem to have a Eastern Hemisphere origin.
And do they have a lot of parasitic species on those two continents?
Not that we know of, no. The parasitic ones might have originated in the eastern U.S. There's two. Jason did a paper on the parasitic, the phylogeny, looking at the origins of parasitism, and he figured out there was two origins, and all the ones that we know about are from the eastern U.S.
Cool. Okay, up on screen is a Lasioglossum zephram, and you can see, so this is the middle leg, but this is the best shot I have of the hind leg. I'll tilt it. This is the tibia, and this is the femur, and like we saw in simplex, the tibia has hair, but it's a little denser, which may or may not be indicative for all of the non-parasitic species, but it's not particularly long or anything. It's when you get to the femur that you start seeing, I'm just scrolling through the focus here, these long curled scopal hairs. Anything else you want to talk about there? I'll try and shift it so we can see it perhaps from the backside.
Yeah, in addition to being longer and more like curled under, the Scopa, true Scopa CD are going to be more plumose. So
Right.
have long branches on them.
And that would help them catch the pollen.
Yeah.
All right. Not
Except
a lot.
for the Sphecotogastra.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I'll go to the head. You might want to explain why Sphecotogastra have a different scopal pattern.
Yeah, so they're not Dialictus. They're Sphecotogastra in the strict sense. So it's a group of Lasioglossum that specialize on primroses, on the Onageraceae. And those flowers have kind of weird sticky pollen. And the bees that specialize on it have long, straight, rake-like CD without any branches on them in order to collect this odd pollen. So it's a different form of Scopa, and it looks a lot different from other Lasioglossum.
So here
Go back and watch
is,
classes.
pardon? Claire?
We've worked through those in previous classes, so
Yeah.
go to the recordings.
You're not going to see that in Dialictus. That is a different subgenus.
But you might be looking at a bee and see that, thinking initially Dialictus, but the scopal hairs will be like, no, wait a minute, they're far too simple and fine. Maybe I've got actually a Sphecotogastra here. So all these things, there's a little blending sometimes in the identification scheme, which is different from the pure taxonomic scheme among these groups. So you always have to be aware that got to be on your game, and a lot of it comes back to memorization too. All right, so here we are. We're looking at the tooth level or the mandible level at this zephram, and you can see overall a thicker mandible, generally shorter, although simplex is pretty short, although it would go to here. Some of the others are going almost to the opposite end of either the clipial edge here or almost to the mandible base in terms of their length, and they're very scimitar-like and usually thinner, not always. And then some of the parasitic species have a tooth, but I think but a lot of times it's small, and there's these long modifications of the mandible that are a counter, are in opposition to the identification of a pollen-carrying species. Here you can see a little tooth here, but you have a more robust and shorter mandible. You can't really see most of the time what's going on here with the labrum, and the the edge is hidden by the mandibles, but that is a good character, but rarely are these mandibles open. Anything else you want to add there, Joel?
Nope. That about covers it.
Do we want to see anything else? Should we look at the pronotal collar?
I don't think we need to do that unless there's demand for it. I think we can move on to the next couplet.
Got it.
And
I'm going to bring up while you get into the next couplet. So Eric asked, primrose blooms later in the afternoon. Are some of these bees only out and about at later or earlier times of the day? And I just want to note, like on the first page of the key that we sent out, there is a key to the subgenera. And Joel and Jason do note that the scope are reduced to simple, hamate, CT, arranged linearly, ocelli, slightly to greatly enlarged. So Joel, you want to say anything more about that? I feel like you kind of addressed it there.
They for sure are active at later and earlier times. So like dawn and dusk is when a lot of these Onograceae specialists will be out, and a lot of them have big ocelli so that they can see better in the dark. Some bigger than others. So you can kind of tell when a bee will be active by the size of its ocelli.
Okay.
So off to couplet 2.
Yes, indeed. Couplet 2. So, okay, that's color of the metazoma. So this couplet just sorts out the red-tailed species, which I did a revision on the western red-tailed species, which also includes a lot of eastern ones. So it's basically just like the far east coast that's not included in that paper. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. You just look at the metazoma and is it red, or is it brown or black, or metallic green? There can be some specimens will be a little bit intermediate. They'll be kind of like a reddish brown. And generally speaking, you want to look at the metazoma or the abdomen, and if it has any bright red or orange on it, then you follow it to couplet 99. So you're looking for any spot of like really, really bright, bold red or orange. Even if there's some black, there'll be some bright red or orange. If it's like uniformly kind of like a reddish brown and you're not really sure if it's red or not, then take that to 3. So if there's no bright, like really bright, obvious red, then it should go to couplet 3 in general.
And this is all after making sure that you have a Dialictus or Lasioglossum species and not a Sphecodes, which
Yes.
you mostly have red, but the wing venation is separating them out. But surprisingly, there's not tons of other features that separate the two. I mean, yes, they're parasitic, and they have their own quirky little morphologies, but sometimes you're like, oh, that's actually a Sphecodes that I'm looking at.
Especially the males. Sphecodes males get mixed up in Lasioglossum a lot because the wing venation doesn't work on the males. So you kind of have to look at, you kind of just have to know what a Sphecodes looks like and look at the head shape and the sculpture. Sphecodes tend to be more coarsely sculptured. And yeah, it's kind of like, oh, that looks like a Sphecodes male.
So yes, and when talking about the wing venation specifically, it's that weakened versus not weakened venation often is almost impossible. So a lot of times, if you have a good specimen, you usually can see a faint reflection of what the female has in terms of weakening. But a lot of the Lasioglossum species are really tricky. You end up really looking at them and going, oh, I know that's a Lasioglossum male, versus trying to, you'll be frustrated with the key sometimes early on in determining whether that male is or isn't, because even in the females, when you're starting out, you start playing mind games with whether you have weakened cross veins or not weakened cross veins. But it's, again, it's time under the scope that will help with a lot of this. I have a, whenever you're ready, Joel, I have a tegulaire on deck as you go through, just FYI.
All right, yep, that is the next couplet, couplet 3. So this is there are if you get once you get into the southwestern U.S., there are red-tailed species that also have this big tegula. They're not going to key out in this key, but in Canada and the eastern U.S., there aren't any that really have that combination. So these are all going to be dark-tailed species. So tegula does not reach the posterior margin of the mesoscutum and dorsal view, and it's ovoid. That is, most Dialictus are going to have a round tegula, and it's not going to be especially enlarged. And then the alternative state, which is this tegulare and related species, they have a really big tegula. It's going to be kind of bean-shaped or comma-shaped, and it'll be bigger. If you look at the bee from the top view, you can see, like Sam has it here, if you look at that posterior seam between the scutum and the scutellum and the tegula, and it kind of like draw an invisible line like out from the edges, like extend that line out. The tegula reaches that line, and it doesn't in most other, like actually all other species that don't have these big tegulae. And then it's also going to be punctate, at least in all the eastern species. There'll be all these pretty dense punctures on the tegula.
And there's also a whole bunch of species that are a nightmare to tell apart. And you might even want to, as we do now, classify a lot of these things as tegulaire group.
Yes, there is a key. So the other chapter of my thesis was a revision of this whole group. It has all the eastern and the western species in that key. It's called the geminum group. So if you look up the geminum group, there's a key to those. And yes, they can be very difficult to tell apart. It's easier in the east than it is in the west. There aren't as many species in the east, but there are certain pairs that can still be difficult, like tegulare and putulanum is difficult.
Well, Halictidae, I would put in that category of tricky to me.
LSE?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the LSE are not so difficult. difficult once you've seen like a long series of them. But then there are a couple of specimens that have unusual variation.
I would say that in our area, either I'm completely missing them, or we just don't have that that species around. And I don't know. It's just one of my frustrating things that I can't seem to find any good string of Alicia or Aliciae, forget the pronunciation. And then to the south, Pucellanum blends in with Tegulaire because of color variation and Tegulaire, apparent color variation in Tegulaire and Pucellanum. And then all the way down into the tip of Florida, is it Leviensis or Levi or Levy?
Lepidiae lives in southern Florida.
Yeah. And that one also is like really tricky to tell apart too from the others, in my opinion. So I'm not a fan of more species in this group, Joel. I just have to say.
Yeah. Well, there are more species, at least in the West. There's a complex that I could not resolve in my PhD in the West.
So I don't know that we need to look at a non-modified tegula, because I think that's the thing that most people see. So I think unless you think we do, we'll probably skip that and go on.
Yep, I will highlight this if in this couplet. So there's an if here. So if the posterior margin is concave, then the tegula is impunctate. So there's a couple of species in Canada that have a somewhat enlarged tegula. It'll have a little bit of that hook that's in these tegulare-like species, but it's not punctate. Mm-hmm. And so perpunctatum is one of those species. Sheffieldi and Yukoni, all of these Perdificile group species will have a sort of enlarged tegula. It's not really obvious. You have to be kind of looking closely to see it, but it is there.
Okay.
And in the West, there are more species. There are actually Geminum group species, so they're actually related to Tegulare, that have like a bigger tegula, but it's also impunctate. But yeah, if you're in the West, you should be using the Geminum group key.
In the East, should we bother? Are we good with this one, East, or what?
You can use the Geminum group key for any species that has a big tegula. If you're in the East, you can also use this key, because there were no new species in the East that I described in the Geminum group revision.
Okay. Should we go to 4?
Yeah, we can go to 4. So this is looking at the punctation on the scutum. So there's a set of species that have like sparse punctures throughout the whole scutum. Most Dialictus will have kind of sparse punctures in the middle, and then they'll get denser towards the edges. But there's certain species that they're just all sparse, and those ones will go to couplet 89.
I'm going to pull an obscurum and try and show that. I think it's another one that people try to, can be difficult.
Yeah, so the scutum punctures are a good morphosorting character too, if you're trying to morphosort. So there's kind of like 3 states to the scutum punctures. There's the normal state is like kind of sparse in the middle and dense towards the edges. That's the usual state. But then there's all sparse, that's what we're looking at now. And then there's a third state that's all dense. And there'll be another couplet coming up soon that pulls out all those all dense puncture species. So that's kind of a good way to do sort of broad sorting.
Yep. And a lot of times you'll see, like, it's difficult sometimes to really finely divide a scutal puncture patterns and into a key because there's so much variation. But a lot of times when you're morpho sorting, you can see that, okay, well, clearly these patterns are different, even if it's not something that is going to be important in the keying process. It's, again, morphosorting is your friend, and looking at the scutum, looking at the propodial triangle, looking at the T1 fan color, looking at the sides of the thorax there, the pleura is good. So Joel, you want to talk through here what we're looking at in terms of the scutum pitting? There's a parapsital line right there.
Yeah, so the key area to look at here is that area laterat of the parasital line and the parapsital line. So between that vertical line that's kind of highlighted, the light is shining right on it there, which is pretty nice. Between that line and the edge of the scutum, so between that line and the tegula, that is the area that you want to look at to see if the punctures are dense or sparse. And these are definitely sparse punctures. Like, you look at those interspaces, and it's like some of those punctures are, there's a couple of them that are about 1 puncture diameter apart, but most of them are much more than that.
And sometimes you can get a pattern where, so the scutum as a whole is quite sparsely in this species pitted, but sometimes you can get sparsely pitted in the center between the parapsital lines, and other times, and then much more densely pitted between the parapsital line and the edge. So it's not always going to be the case that they mirror each other like this one. Now that we have a nice tegula almost in view, although this one is so see-through, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can't really see the kicked out part at the bottom there. Anything else we want to see here, or I don't know that we need to, I can pull a densely pitted one. What do you think, Joel?
Yeah, we're gonna need to see a densely pitted one anyway for couplet coming up soon. Not the next one, but let's see, which couplet is that?
I remember in one of our first classes, and this has been one of the most useful things I've taken away
13.
after working with these for a while and not knowing this, the distinction that you made and what you just said there of like sparse all over, dense all over, or dense and sparse. But you had told us that what you mean by sparse is just like sometimes an inconsistency, and like if the distance between the pitting changes throughout that center area, that meets the definition of sparse, rather than what I saw there in the example that we had up of, that was my definition of sparse, but for the more common group, that was really helpful to me.
Right. So that is a useful thing to keep in mind when we get to couplet 13, when you pull out the ones that are all dense. So in that case, you want to look at the middle of the scutum and look at, is that the same as that area next to the parapsital lines, or is it sparser in the middle?
All right, Joel, you want to walk us through here? I've got a Oceanicum on deck.
Yeah, so here is this is the usual state of the scutum. So you can see the parapsital line, Sam is kind of like moving his cursor along it. And so to kind of ladder out of that, between that line and the tegula, you can see the punctures are really dense in that area. They're pretty much all less than 1 diameter apart. And then also on the other side of it, so towards the middle of the scutum, but kind of like next to that line, they're also dense there. And then as you get closer to the middle, they get sparser. So yeah, in the middle,
Yep.
like there's most of them are like 1 diameter. There's a couple that are 2 apart. So that's what you're usually going to see.
All right. Go ahead there. And so we're on to 5 now.
Yep, so now we get to the whether or not there's a fan on T1. So in Lasioglossum sensu stricto, this is called the acarinarial fan because there's mites that actually ride on it. So a lot of the Lasioglossum sensu stricto have mites associated with them that are kind of like beneficial, so they'll like eat fungi in the nest and keep the pollen provisions clean. So the bees have kind of like this symbiotic relationship with these mites that ride in this fan on T1. And no other Lasioglossum have this fan structure on T1 except Dialictus. So Dialictus will have a similar looking fan, but interestingly, there's very rarely mites on it. So it's pretty rare that you actually find a Dialictus that has mites in this area. So we're not actually sure if it's a true acarinarial fan, but it looks similar. So it'll be this kind of like, so in most bees, if you look at T1 and you look at the base, kind of like where it meets, where it like kind of faces the propodium, it'll just be like a bunch of straight CD sticking up in no particular pattern. And when there's a fan, those CD that are sticking straight up, they'll kind of be kind of like pressed down and like splayed out in more of a fan shape, and they'll be denser usually too.
So we have versans on deck here.
Yeah, so this is one that does not have the fan. So this is the normal state for most bees. Most Dialictus do have a fan. There's only a few that don't. Or I should say most Western Hemisphere Dialictus. Most Eastern Hemisphere Dialictus do not have this fan. So this is kind of a synapomorphy for the Western Hemisphere species. And there's just these few kind of primitive lineages that don't have this fan. So you can see there's just kind of a bunch of irregular, like straight CD sticking up in no particular pattern.
I'll show it from the side, which is often a good way to look at hairs. Whether it's on Lasioglossum or Melisodes, often you get a better picture and portrait of hair patterns if you don't look straight down, but you look to the side and see things more in silhouette. Oops. There we go.
Yeah, so there you can see that these CD on T1 are they're going to be sticking straight up. They're not going to be bent down. They're certainly not going to be lying flat on the integument.
Joel, I can't remember if I
The ones that-
copied you, but I had sent a note to Jason. I'd seen a whole series of specimens from Michigan, south of Detroit, that had essentially no aconarial fan and no raised setae here. But see this line here, which often shows up but is rarely important. It had this line of raised hairs, but there were there were maybe 15 specimens of this. It was very consistent and no aconarial fan. So I thought that was weird.
Yeah, I did hear about those specimens, and I'm not sure what to make of them without seeing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to see a fan? A specimen with a fan? Just have it in contrast?
Yeah. So if you're morpho sorting, this is another good way to do it. So there's like the 3 states of the scutum punctures, and then there's also kind of 3 states of this T1 fan. There's no fan, like we just saw, and then among the species that have a fan on T1, you can also sort those by whether or not that fan is complete or whether it has a gap in the middle. So we say it's incomplete if there's a gap in the middle of it.
Oops. I think Jason mentioned, maybe it was you, that a lot of times the more normal state out west is a complete fan.
That's right. So most of the species, not all of them, but most of them that have the incomplete fan are the ones in the Viridautum group, which are the worst to try to identify as species. And the Viridautum group does exist in the West, but it's less common. So a lot more of the species you find are going to have the complete fan there. Do the aconarial fan hairs wear off with age? Yes, they can. So you can find specimens with worn, where the fan is kind of like worn off. And it can be tricky to tell in those cases whether or not there is a fan or whether or not there's supposed to be a fan. But usually, almost always, there's going to be at least a few setae left. And you can tell if there's even a few setae left, you can tell whether or not there's supposed to be a fan by whether or not they're sticking straight up or whether they're lying flat on the integument. So if they're lying flat, that's an indication that there's supposed to be a fan there.
The more common problem is you can't see it because of the way the specimen has been, whether the abdomen is pushed up against the thorax or it's goopy. So sometimes you can't use that character at all.
Right, yeah. It definitely helps to have specimens with the abdomen drooping a little so that you can see this. And so here's speaking of worn fans, and there are a couple of species that actually have a fan, but it'll be very, very sparse. Especially in the West, there's a common species, Nevidense, that has a very sparse fan. Also, Hudsoniellum is a red-tailed species, and that's another one that has a very sparse fan. And it can actually be hard to see, like whether or not there even is a fan there or not. But you can look at those setae and whether or not they're sticking straight up or they're flat down. And even these species with the sparse fan, those hairs will be flat. So that's how you can tell if there's a fan or not.
So this is, I believe, Subviridatum, very open, and you can't see the left-hand side. This is T1. Here's the base. Here's the thorax. But you can see that there's a piece of this oppressed fan on the far side there. And the hairs are prone as we're looking straight down and they're not sticking up. You know, we're seeing the entire lengths there.
Although I should mention that when I say whether or not they're sticking up or flat on the integument, I'm talking about in the middle. So towards the far edges, there's always going to be a few CD that are sticking straight up.
Yep.
But in the middle, they're going to be flat down.
Yeah. Usually it's a semicircle like this. Hey, Sydney, could you get, this is Chuck, could you film? I'll be ready at 2. Sorry.
If you got to jump at 2, you got a 2-minute warning.
Okay. Well, 2-ish.
Cool.
All right, and yeah, so this is one of the Viridautum group species. So this is one of the ones with an incomplete fan, as we call it. So there's a gap in the middle. You're basically looking at 1/2 of it in this view. Yeah.
And this is, the fan is one of my, and I think your guys' 2 favorite characters. It tends to be pretty consistent. So there are even species, I'm thinking of Gotham, where this fan is almost entirely complete, but there's a little tiny gap at the center. So, and other times, you know, this is dense, other times it's light, other times it's more complete and less complete, you know, so it's another good character to be looking at when you're trying to figure out, are these 2 different things?
Yes, besides whether or not it's complete or incomplete, present or absent, there's also all sorts of other more subtle characters you can use on this fan, like the length of the CD. There's some species that have very long CD, so like they're flat down and they're like all overlapping each other and you can't see the integument underneath. And then there's some other ones that have very, very short CD forming this fan, so it looks like somebody took a razor and shaved it. So like Clare in the West is one of those that has that very short CD fan. And then like the size of it, so how much area it covers. Semi-ceruleum is a very common like Western Midwest species that has a really huge fan, like bigger than any other Dialictus.
Yep. Given the time, this and this seems like maybe this is a good stopping point. Do we have more fan discussions to look at, talk about? Are there people in the audience who have questions? I'll point out in this picture. Sorry, Claire, just one last thing. Here's a kind of a good shot of this basket here on the femur. This is a pollen collecting species, and we'll rotate it in and out. And so you can see it is plumose, and these aren't like Melisodes or Exomolopsis level brushes of hair. So again, you get into a little bit of subtlety because the parasitic species still will have some hair, but it's just not as extensive. Again, we look to just a lot of experience looking at stuff. So you look through a lot of specimens and you're scoping out a lot of these different kinds of features and characters. And over time, you'll start noticing that, oh, this looks like species X, but it's got more or less hair. It's got a different fan. There's subtleties to the pitting, subtleties to the color, the amount of oppressed hairs on the abdomen, and so forth are different.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Ellen, I did answer the fan aging question. So the answer to that was that it can rub off, but you can tell whether or not there's supposed to be a fan by looking at the CD. There'll be at least a couple of them remaining, and whether or not they're straight up or flat down. And then Mike asks if the hair color always matches the other metazoma hairs. And yes, it does. Actually, basically, like the whole body is generally going to have the same color hairs all over in Dialictus. There's kind of subtle variations. Some of them can be yellower or whiter, but there aren't any Dialictus that have black seed that I'm aware of. At least not up here, not in the US or Canada. And yeah, they're generally going to be pretty uniform in color.
Well,
No. You want me a Coke,
repetition.
Sam? Jinx.
Yeah,
You go.
I was going to say repetition is good. So this is great to cover these things and with Joel's perspective. And so, Claire, are we going to continue next week?
If that is all good with you folks, we can pick up at couplet 6 where we've jumped here. He's got an email that this is a format that people like, walking through each state. So thank you for your patience with that. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, gentlemen.
I think I will have my microscope camera working again next week.
Wow, that's
How's
always
the
great.
flood? How's the flood in your lab, Joel? Joel told us a couple days ago that he has mopped up a fairly extensive pool of water in his collection.
Yes, indeed, there was a flood yesterday. None of the specimens were damaged, fortunately. But yes, there was a lot of water on the floor that I had to mop up. Was a bit worried that there might be more pipes bursting because we don't know what caused it still. But so far, nothing's happened.
Well, it's the
All
bees
right.
that matter.
Yeah, well, good luck. Good luck with
Good luck, everyone.
water. All right,
Have a
anything
great
else,
day.
Claire?
No, we have some days off coming up in early February when you're traveling, but I don't think we need to worry about that right now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right, have a great week, folks. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Joel.
All right. See you later.